mission will continue. This is a sad and tragic incident, mistaken identity leading to friendly fire.
There's Minister of National Defence Jason Kenney. He was speaking late yesterday about the death of Canadian soldier Sergeant Andrew Doiron in Iraq. That's where we start our Sunday Scrum. Joining us today, the CBC's Rosemary Barton, freelance columnist Susan Riley, and John Ibbotson of the Globe and Mail. And as always, please tweet me your thoughts at Andrew CBC. So, John, since you're our guest once in a while, we'll start with you. What do you make of Kenney's comments that Sergeant Doiron's death won't change the mission in Iraq?
No, nor should it be expected to. If you put troops in harm's way, even if it's on a training mission, things will happen. And remember, we do have CF-18 fighters conducting sorties, so they're always subject to anti-aircraft fire, and that's just, it's a very dangerous part of the world, and we have people in it. I don't think in any way it will affect either the resolve of those who are determined to continue and extend this mission, which I'm quite convinced the Conservative government is going to do, or the opposition of those who believe that the mission is a mistake. It's simply a bad day in an ongoing situation that will not, and you know, as tragic as this death is, it's not going to change it. Politically, it's just another bump on the road.
But Rosie, we certainly have heard from the NDP specifically saying, wait a second, this is not what the government told us we were going to be doing. So we're likely to hear more of that kind of talk, right?
Yeah, I mean, I slightly disagree with John, because we are in a period where the conversation about extending that mission is about to ramp up as the government seeks to put this in front of Parliament again. So I think that you have to remember that part of the climate. And I also think this is something that the Conservatives were sort of dreading politically. This does raise and reignite the conversation about why people are on the ground, these 68 or so, or 63 trainers on the ground in Iraq, why we seem to be encountering, issues on the front line, at least more often than our allies, at least to our knowledge. And now we have a death associated with that. I think that it does change the conversation going forward. I don't think it changes the political position, certainly not. But I think it gives new fodder for the opponents of this mission, who can now say, well, this is exactly what we were worried about, and why have we put ourselves in this position, even if it was just one of these horrible coincidences that happened in a dangerous part of the world.
Susan?
I agree with Rosie. I mean, apart from the personal tragedy for the family of this soldier, and somehow it's always more bitter when it's a friendly fire incident, I don't think Canadians will take too well to the Kurdish commander who said, well, it was their fault. As he's quoted in the New York Times this morning as blaming the Canadians. They were ordered to stay in their Jeep. They got out. It was night. It was confusing. We called out to them. They responded in Arabic rather than English. Therefore, we shot them. It's another example of, no good deed goes unpunished. And there have been plenty of those. Our humanitarian or our interventions, which are always high-minded, often blow up in our face. So if anything, that might give some ammunition to people who are against the military aspect of this mission.
Canadians got their first look Friday morning at the cell phone video made by Parliament Hill shooter Michael Z.F. Bibeau. In it, he ties his attack on Corporal Nathan Cirillo to Canadian Forces missions in Afghanistan and Iraq.
So we are retaliating. The Mujahideen of this world, Canada's officially become one of our enemies by fighting and bombing us, aiming to hit some soldiers, just to show you that you're not even safe in your own land. So you got to be careful.
We now know he later went on to kill unarmed Corporal Nathan Cirillo and storm Parliament. The RCMP edited 18 seconds out of the video for what it calls sound operational reasons. 13 seconds were cut from the beginning and 5 seconds from the end. John, the significance to when this video was released, is there anything there?
Well, of course, there was a lot of concern that it took so long for it to be released. Why wasn't the RCMP offering it to the public right away? But now that it was released, again, I think it's simply, and this debate, whether it takes place in Ottawa or whether it takes place in Iraq, this debate is one in which minds are made up. Positions are polarized and fixed. For those on the one side of the argument, this was a terrorist inspired by Islamic State and by Islamic extremism who decided to take the war to the national capital. To others, this was a mentally disturbed young man who perhaps had addiction issues as well, who committed a random act of violence. Sometimes I wonder whether there's any possibility of allowing facts to get in the way of any of these arguments, because people seem to be so polarized on both sides of it.
Rosie?
I was in the room when the video was aired. I wanted to go up and sort of, be part of the story as it was unfolding. The room was very tense, even for MPs. I think, it hit them personally that was the room they were hiding in when Zehaf Bibo stormed down the hall and was ultimately shot. I think those things matter to them. I think that it could be viewed for a lot of people as quite a chilling video, not unlike other videos that we've seen of people who do these kinds of things. But I think sometimes when you see the video, it brings it home in some ways. And I don't think we should underestimate sort of the people's emotional reaction to a video that we all knew was going to look about the way it looked. And I think it definitely helps the Conservatives as they try and push forward on a number of fronts, whether it be the anti-terror bill, whether it be the extension on the mission of Iraq. This helps them make the case that they believe this is happening, it's happening at home, and that Canada is a target.
Susan?
I guess it helps the Conservatives, but I think they're overplaying their hand, quite frankly, and drumming up fear, leaving aside this video for a moment. They've been definitely on a fear campaign. A lot of self-appointed elites are questioning the details of the terrorism bill. There's questions about the way the Harper government is using this incident and another one, Al-Shabaab's threat, to the West Edmonton Mall to kind of crank up the terror and therefore justify their legislation. I think the Conservatives are walking a very fine line, and public opinion could swing. Of course, everybody wants to be vigilant against terrorism, but people may start questioning, how extensive the threat is. Is this legislation the best and only defense? I would argue that what Zehaf Bibo did was not so much an assault on Parliament as it shows the failure of the RCMP security at the exterior of the building, of the parliamentary precinct. That, to me, is the most chilling aspect of what happened. And now, of course, the RCMP is going to be given responsibility for security inside and outside the Parliament buildings.
All right. Well, this week, Prime Minister Harper will introduce new legislation that would make it harder for some people to get parole. That includes crimes involving sexual assault, kidnapping, terrorism, police corrections officers. Here's how the Prime Minister described it.
The fact is, there are certain criminals who should never, ever be allowed to walk the streets where you and your neighbors live and work, or the streets where our children play. And there are certain crimes so repulsive that only a lifelong punishment adequately reflects their truly horrific nature.
All right, so Rosie, we've seen this kind of theme from the Prime Minister and this government over the years. What's the thinking here?
I think people are having a hard time with this one because what they've done is, target the sort of most horrific of criminals and said you cannot get parole until after 35 years. When you press the government to give you examples of just specifically who that targets, they have a hard time coming up with names. And that's because we are not talking about an enormous number of people. There are not hundreds and dozens of killers walking around after 25 years as potential threats to Canadians. In part, this was done, I think, for victims' families who don't have to go in front of the parole board and make the case for why someone that killed a member of their family should stay behind bars. And from that perspective, it will be welcome. But the government is having a difficult time, I think, making the case as to why this is so necessary. And I think Canadians have a right to be skeptical about that.
John, do you think this sets up the government for another battle with the courts?
Oh, absolutely. The official opposition to the Conservative government is not the NDP, and it's not the Liberal Party. The official opposition to this government is the Supreme Court of Canada. And the warfare between the Prime Minister and Chief Justice Beverley McLaughlin is open. It's It's unseemly, actually, on the government's part. But there's no question the purpose of this bill is not to protect the public from people who commit particularly heinous crimes. The purpose of this bill is to impose a particular kind of retribution, of punishment, vengeance, on those who commit particular crimes. And there is going to be a significant section of the public that says, yes, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and if you kill a police officer, or it's an act of terrorism, or a kidnapping, or a sexual assault is involved, that person should never be allowed to see the light of day for as long as that person lives. And the Supreme Court of Canada is going to have something to say about that.
And that fight, Susan, goes right down to that ugly piece of junk, as you called it.
That's right, exactly.
The memorial in front of the Supreme Court. But on a serious topic, what's your take, Susan?
Well, my take is that this piece of legislation is almost purely decorative, that it's not really necessary, that existing criminal code provisions cover off most of what the Prime Minister, almost all of what the Prime Minister is talking about. Secondly, his characterization or implication that parole boards are, composed of, social workers and sociologists and other people who are letting these, being fooled by these hardened criminals. The facts just don't support that analysis. In fact, our parole boards, are very exacting, very rough. They don't let very many people out. They're tougher than parole boards, say, in the United States, according to comparative studies. So essentially, this is just more drumming up fear. The Conservatives are already fundraising on this, talking about murderers in your neighborhood. There's the occasional lurid case. Vincent Lee springs to mind. Clifford Olson, of course. These are horrific. They're terrifying. Nobody wants those people out in the streets again. They're not out on the streets, basically. The people who do reoffend, again, sorry to be tedious about this, but it's facts, people who do reoffend tend to be not the most brutal, heinous murderers. They tend to be run-of-the-mill garden variety murderers. And the problem is that future behavior is really unpredictable.
All right. Another piece of news that happened in just the past few hours. See, sometimes I worry that things don't happen on the weekend, but they do. Politics does happen. Something happens on the weekend like this. Conservative MP and former PMO Director of Communications, John Williamson, is in some hot water. He made some controversial comments yesterday about Canada's temporary foreign workers program. Now he's apologizing. This is his apology. Today I used offensive and inappropriate language regarding the temporary foreign workers program. For this, I apologize unreservedly. I believe different parts of Canada have different labor needs. With respect to my region, I believe employers in my district need to work to fill job vacancies by prioritizing Canadians for available jobs. He was at the Manning Networking Conference in Ottawa. This is what he had to say. He said it makes no sense to pay whiteys to stay home while companies bring in brown people. So those were the comments. I don't know where to start with this one. John.
Neither do I. I know John Williamson. I think we all know John Williamson. He is a smart, well-educated, and reasonable person. He was Director of Communications for one of many, for Stephen Harper for about a year. This is completely outside anything I would have ever expected John to say. It is true that in the maritime provinces, and John represents New Brunswick riding, that you have temporary foreign workers, most of whom come from developing countries, working in fish processing plants and other places, while local workers are on unemployment insurance, and that is an issue. It's a question of whether EI premiums and benefits disincentivize local people from working in particular industries during particular months of the year, while temporary foreign workers take their jobs, whether we have job shortages at the same time that we have people on EI. You can debate all of that. What you can't debate is that it was an incredibly stupid thing for John to say, and I have no idea what he was thinking.
And so, Rosie, it's a long time, right, since the Reform Party, they made mistakes. It's the year 2015. This government's been in power for 8 or 9 years. And then once in a while, something like this happens. I know it's not exclusively the Conservative Party, but it seems to happen more with Conservative MPs than with MPs from other parties.
Well, I don't know. I mean, everyone makes mistakes in terms of what their messaging is. I think at a time like this, the government's probably very thankful that John Williamson is not in charge of government communications.
Yeah, and also may I say that you know, it was a racist statement is what it was. And where it came from, who knows? I mean, I don't know him well. Who knows where it came from? He apologized immediately and fully. He realized the error of his ways. But what's unfortunate in a way is that his criticism of the program, Temporary Foreign Workers Program, will really resonate with a lot of people. In fact, it sounds like what the Liberals and the NDP were saying when this whole issue blew up, which is if you bring in foreign workers, I don't care if they're from Ireland, wherever they're from, and allow companies to pay them at a lower rate and, you know, subject them to much harsher conditions than Canadian workers, you're driving wages down, you're leaving Canadians unemployed, and it's just wrong. It sends our economy in the wrong direction. And I think that was his underlying message, which is completely lost now in his in the racially tinged comments he made.
All right, lots more to come in round 2 of the Sunday Scrum. We'll be right back.